Hello and welcome from me, Duncan, and Gavin over at Genre Books, and we're going to talk today about the Eighth Andromeda, the books. And just to do if nobody knows, Eighth Andromeda was a BBC TV series from 1961-62, remember, around for 7 episodes, and then was made into these novelizations. Only one episode remains, which I think is episode 7, because the BBC, in all their brightness at that time, used to record over everything and lose everything like backwards, like they did later episodes of Doctor Who, and many things have been lost by the BBC because they didn't think anybody would ever want to watch it again, which is why there's only that episode. The TV show has been remade twice as far as I know. I think there's a Yugoslavian version or a Spanish version, I can't remember, one of the other.
Italian.
Or Italian?
I think it's Italian. I've not seen it.
I know, no. And there's obviously the remake in 2006 that was on BBC 4 in the UK, which I was going to watch, and I haven't watched it yet because I've not had time because life in December has been a bit chaotic. So I said, both myself and Gavin have read it, and we've got the sequel, which we're going to go on to later, and we are just our thoughts about it. There will be spoilers in this. I think we will warn you now, because I think that's the only way you can discuss it properly is by basically telling you most of the plot, because it's quite an interesting book, and it's not, for me, it wasn't, past few months I've just sort of struggled to pick up books, so it wasn't the sort of book that made me want to immediately read the next page, which I found quite interesting, but it had some interesting ideas in it. I don't know what your initial thoughts of it were.
I think it has some faults, and I think I've got a couple of ideas why that might be, but we can come to that.
Yeah, because it was written by Fred Hoyle, who was a cosmologist, and John Elliot, who was a scriptwriter, producer for the BBC. And apparently Souvenir Books came to them after the TV series was done and said, we need a novelization. And Hoyle turned around and said, well, I had the ideas. John Elliot wrote a lot of the scripty stuff, so we need to do it together and get it out. And that was how it ended up being a novelization. And it's one of these weird occasions that the novelization has outlived the program.
They did it very quickly as well. I think they were contracted to do it in the August, and I think the book was out by November. They got it done in 2 months. And you can tell that they've used the scripts, which I think is part of the problem.
Yeah, I didn't realise that. So actually that explains some of the conversations between people, the way the back and forth between people was, especially at the beginning, I think. So the basic plot, for anybody who doesn't know, is it's to do with the radio telescope at a fictional radio telescope, but I think it was based on Jodrell Bank, or I don't think it was Jodrell Bank built by then, and basically they are getting a transmission from the Andromeda Galaxy. They pick up this transmission and they discover that it's basically from a alien race, and it plans to build a computer. That is the basic sort of synopsis of how it starts. And you start off with the guy that did it was Fleming, group of scientists. John Fleming and Dennis Bridger were the two main people who sort of built the radio telescope. And it all starts off with them discovering the message, trying to work out what it is. But the bit about you said about the scripty bit, there's a character in the beginning of it called Judy, what's her surname?
Is that Adamson?
Adamson, who is a so-called the press officer, but she's also working for the government as like a sort of security officer. And there's conversations between her and Fleming that feel very scripty.
Yeah, a little bit. You can tell it's like, I think on the screen it would have been seen as flirty.
Yeah, there's a bit,
and maybe that sort of like rapid fire. They're talking very quickly at each other, but on the script that just sounds a little bit too pat and clever.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the problems from the book come from this. I'm going to cut it some slack because, as far as I can figure out, this is the first ever novelization of a science fiction series. I can't find anything that comes before this.
Think about it.
There are everything else has been turning established pieces into television or cinema, or the Saturday morning cinema for kids. So you've had your Buck Rogers and your Flash Gordon. They've come from the comics. They've come from the pulps. Here we've actually got it the other way around. It started its life as a TV show. I can't think of another. The Quatermass books came later, much later.
Because Andrew Neil didn't want to write
these. Yeah, he was. He did. I mean, he did eventually, but I think he didn't write them until the 70s.
No.
So this is the first. I might be wrong. I'm happy to be proved wrong, but I can't find another television series in the US or in America. Sorry, the UK or in America that has had this happen. So they are sort of breaking new ground in a way.
But it was almost, the TV series was like the second sort of serious science fiction one after the Quatermass ones in the 50s. Because before that, you would have got quite sort of pulpy throwaway stuff on the TV.
Yeah.
Especially in America, you got all the.
I think you'd had some one-offs, hadn't you? You'd had the sort of Play for Today, the sort of series, the anthology series and stuff like that. But I don't know when Twilight Zone started a little bit later. I don't know. But you had the Twilight Zone and Outer Limits very close to each other. But I don't think they're taking stories and turning them into TV shows rather than the other way around. So
most it was, yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think it's the first instance. But they didn't quite get it right. All the dialogue sounds, as you say, stagey, and it is quite lacking in action.
Yeah. There was a bit that stuck out to me, and it's obviously sexism of the day, because it's 1961, is when he said something to Judy Fleming did, and then the last one was he patted her on the bottom.
Yes.
For some reason, that just stuck out to me. And it stuck out to me. I expect sexism in books of this age, but it just really sort of stuck out like a sore thumb, that bit. So I wonder whether that came across from the script, whether on stage it didn't look as in the actual original program. If they did that, it wasn't so obvious, or it was just sort of a throwaway.
In the 60s, it's always happening on stage. I mean, you wouldn't be able to move in like a carry-on film or or something like that. But that is played for laughs. This was just, do you know what? It's the banality of the sexism. I did make a note about the slapping because I thought, I think times have changed, thankfully.
But I thought the women characters were quite weird because sometimes in some ways they were really, really strong and really good sort of meaty characters, and then in other ways, then suddenly they would almost change character and then end up being sort of your stereotypical how they were represented. And it's like, make up your mind. What sort of character do you want here?
Yeah, I mean, Judy Adamson should have been a much meatier role. See, so she's brought in, and they don't like her because she's supposed to be this PR person, and then she is apparently this PR person for a project that is supposed to be top secret, which is that'd be a difficult job at the best of times. But yes, she's there under false pretenses. When that is sort of uncovered, or when she admits it, their attitude towards her doesn't really change.
No.
But she changes from being, I'm the spy to, I have, feelings, and that was a little bit unconvincing. There's the Christine character, the younger mathematician.
Yes.
Who doesn't, I mean, it's good in a way that it's just that women are portrayed in this scientific endeavor at all of the scientific ranks, but she's there as supposedly this genius whiz, and she's basically left to do the data entry. But then you've got Madeline Dorney, the scientist they bring in,
the biologist,
that replaces Fleming once Fleming has doubts once he's created the computer. And there's not a lot to her, but what there is, I really like. The fact that, she is standing her own ground. She doesn't like Fleming. She stands up to Fleming because Fleming's he's a bit of an arse.
Yes.
For a hero, he is. He's not very likable. I'd have to say he's quite caustic. He's short with people. He can't see his own shortcomings, and he's got an absolute blind spot when it comes to his friend, who is basically a mole.
Yeah.
Yes, because we have Judy Anderson as this sort of spy to find the traitor. We also do have a traitor. So Dennis Bridger is selling out to this company, and again, this is quite new in books. I think this is one of the first times you see an evil corporation. You've had evil geniuses before, but actually to show it as, this is the company from a scientific perspective.
Because what basically happens, if anybody, is that Fleming starts decoding the messages from the aliens, and his partner starts selling out to this company. I think they're called Intel, aren't they? Maybe laugh.
Yep.
And as you said, it's first time evil corporations, but you've got sort of hanging over it is the Cold War, because it feels very Cold War-ish at points. It reminded me of sort of some of the Cold War films I've seen. So I can imagine in my head as I was reading it, it felt, all the sort of 60s and 70s Cold War films that always looked very grey when they were meeting in East Berlin and things. That's what it sort of reminded me of.
And it's a very specific time of the Cold War as well. So when this comes out, it's, I think, before the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, that was 68, wasn't it?
That's 60. No, it must have been 60
or 60.
62, 63.
Sorry, it's earlier than I thought. Yeah.
But yeah, because Kennedy.
Yes.
Alive. Yes.
And
as you know, he was killed on the day the first episode of Doctor Who came out. So that's the way you remember that one, whichever way around you put your priorities. So this was a point in the Cold War where America, and therefore us as America's ally, are not winning. The reason that this radio telescope gets repurposed is because they're looking out for basically Sputniks. And they have no way to counter it, which is why they leap into the arms of this sort of computer without doing any sort of due diligence as to what kind of Pandora's box they're opening. So it is written at that time, but it is the time it's supposed to be set is the late 60s. So I think to make it a little bit more removed, to make maybe this.
Yeah, because it starts in 1970, I think, and 72. It's so-called is the final bit of it. But what made me think of it, you had the Cold War bit, and then you have Britain not willing to tell anybody about this. So it's almost felt like that they were trying to pull up their status, because obviously at this time the so-called British Empire was coming apart post-war specifically. And I think some of that is sort of lying around it as well. It's all about Britain trying to gain power through technology and through moving forward through science.
It's not accepting its current situation as a second-rate world power. There's still thought at that time a little bit. We had something of an empire still at that point, so you could have made an argument for it. It did not last, but yeah, there is it's funny that they're very keen to co-opt the Americans to use their computer to help them design their computer, but when it then turns out that they've leapfrogged them in technology, they really don't want to share, which is quite prescient in some ways. Hoyle wouldn't have known about it, but we had that with the Enigma. Having broken the Enigma code and not let on that we'd broken the Enigma code, after the war we proceeded to flog all the captured Enigma machines to the Americans because we were never able to break this code. Yeah, you go ahead. You want them? Yeah, we'll give them to you cheap. We had access to the American secrets for a while whilst they used them. The science story is one thing. I think maybe what makes the story drag is all the gumph that goes with it, the politics, the military aspects. And I think part of the problem is that on the page, a lot of these top brass figures all do sound the same. There's not many distinctive voices there.
Yes.
Between Quadring or Gears or Reinhardt's possibly the only one because he's usually battling for them. But the rest of them just seem to be much of a muchness. Vandenberg. I mean, I've seen part of the one remaining episode, and the only way you'd be able to tell Vandenberg apart is because he has the American accent. The way he's talking is exactly the same. The patter.
But watching that one remaining episode, I have a feeling it was better as a TV program than it is on the page. It feels that way. It feels like there's, because you've got the visual aspect as well, as you said, because everybody's blaring into one a bit in the book about who's speaking, whereas you can physically see the people there seems to, I think, separate it up a little bit. As you said, it's I don't know what Elliot's other work was. I really haven't had a look into his history.
I've got a little something. But he had a couple of series that he sort of championed, and they really haven't lasted. But as a director, he directed 4 episodes of the Andromeda Breakthrough, which does exist. He also wrote for Z-Cars, Maigret, Softly Softly, Fall of Eagles, and a couple of David Attenborough series, Natural World and something else as well. He also did, there's not a lot of information about him, but he also did something called According to Hoyle in 1977. And I didn't know this, but According to Hoyle is basically a phrase people use in science because there's a much older famous scientist called Hoyle, and people used to say, well, according to Hoyle. But he's taken that phrase and he's used it, and he's talking about Fred Hoyle. So it's a program about Fred, which has Hoyle in it. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. It has James Burke as the presenter, so from Tomorrow's World and what have you.
Connections.
Yeah. Sir Bernard Lovell's in it. But there is a sort of dramatisations of bits, and Jane Asher is in it. Now, Jane Asher is then in the 1996 remake, and I imagine that's why she is in it. But yeah, he doesn't. I mean, you see, those are some good shows. Fall of Eagles is good. The Natural World is obviously sort of BBC classic.
Was a classic.
Z-Cars just went on forever, and Maigret too. But so some sort of solid work there. But he doesn't look like he went on to become, isn't like a lot of these things where you see they start on Quatermass or Andromeda, and then you see, it's Doctor Who, it's Blake Seven, it's XYZ. It seems to be just like he's a TV guy. Hoyle, this is only his 3rd book, fiction book.
Yes, because you read one of his books previously. I know you said beforehand you were reading one of his.
Years ago, I read The Black Cloud, which was his 1st book. And I think that might be my 2nd favourite of his. And that is in the 50s. And, it is... I think maybe what Elliot brings to this is women. Because there don't seem to be any or very many in Hoyle's other work. But there's just a lot of men there with their pipes, talking about the scientific problem that they're encountering, and maybe it's a bit more reflective of the 50s or the workplace at the time it was being written. Then he wrote something which I read the other week called Ossian's Ride, which is, again, it's okay. It's not brilliant. It's quite espionage-y, but it is science fiction. But it does end with the kind of premise that A for Andromeda then goes on to. So it's a definite. He's influenced himself, but he's definitely expanded the idea with A for Andromeda. And then I read the other week, October the 1st is Too Late, which I think is the best of his books that I've read so far. That is just like, it's a little bit more out there, but the characterization is a lot better. And he allows his imagination to have a bit more free range, I think.
Because of the science in this feels good and solid, and from what you know about it, and obviously you've got the biology part of it as well, because the story goes on from once they build the computer then tells them to run this program which gives them some the techniques to create living cells, and then they create this blob with an eye in the middle of it, basically, and then they go on to create a facsimile of a person. And all this, you've got to think that Crick and Watson sort of decoded the DNA in the mid 50s, wasn't it? So they're talking about DNA. It's all real current science that they're talking about, which is all, I think, which is why it probably appealed at the time a lot, which is why it probably did, the TV program did so well, because it all felt popular science and popular people that were around at the time. I think that's almost why it still lasted as well, because it's a snapshot of what was going on then. You've got the Cold War, you've got the science part of it. And I think that's why it's sort of bubbled under. And it's people. I was looking around and see what people are saying, and a few people saying, "Oh, it's a forgotten classic, almost." But we don't know if it was as good as people are saying it was. All we've got here is the book, a couple of episodes, some photos, and we've obviously got the sequel. But I don't think you could judge this, even though I've not read the sequel yet, and I've not watched Andromeda Breakthrough yet, which I'm going to. You can't really judge this first one by the sequel, I don't think.
No, I mean, you can sort of, you've got one episode, so you've got an idea of what it might be like. And, you could look at stuff that's made around the same time. It's going to be fairly static. There's going to be a lot of people standing around talking because they weren't able to move the cameras about like they could do in later years. And this is another reason the book is very staid.
Which is why the book that's a shame, because the book could have expanded that bit quite well. That's what the book could have done different to the series. But
I don't
weren't used to writing novelizations and TV series. I don't think they realise that.
That's it. And I think maybe you've been asked to produce a specific product, which is, we want that TV show, but in a book. If you start to create new locations, have car chases, all of this sort of stuff, then you may legitimately sort of annoy some of the audience who, are not going to come back and watch the sequel, which presumably must have been in the back of their minds as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting with the technology is cutting edge at some points, and yet this thing is still fed by punch cards, which is brilliant. Everything comes out on a readout. Sort of a paper that they tear off, and they sort of wave at each other and say, can't you see? There's a lot of, can't you see? Don't you realise? No, I don't realise. Explain it to me. And then half a page. There's a lot of exposition is in the dialogue, but I think it has to be. I think probably there is a bit more in there that you can't, you can't show on the page that you can do on the television. So I think the novelization suffers even more by trying to remain so faithful. Can we talk about the computer?
Yes.
Because I think, the computer, Fleming calls it a he to begin with. And it does seem to have some characteristics. It doesn't talk. It isn't. It reminded me in a little in how it acts. I think it's the biggest antecedent there is for Hal. Because this computer kills people.
Yeah.
But it gets annoyed, which is odd. It wants to. It later on it punishes people. And more to the point, the people seem okay with that, which I found even weirder. They absolutely dismiss Fleming's notion that this thing has emotions. And yet once the computer is, I think, what's the body count? 2-3 people? Everyone seems to be fine with that.
Yeah, to use the sort of word at the time, it's almost AI, isn't it? Proper science fiction AI, not the stuff that they talk about that everybody's on about normally, but proper intelligence.
Yeah, where they're talking about thinking, well, if it's too bad, we can unplug it. And it's just like, well, okay, that's probably the first time they're using that particular trope as well. It's and there is no unplugging it after a little while.
Now it's time for ice cream. Or maybe some nuts. A cool glass of orange. Why not try a hot dog? Or the real thing, a cool, refreshing Coca-Cola. From the sales staff and in the foyer. Now.
A high-powered doctor, his profession and his passion collide in Accident of Birth, an Avon paperback. It reaches inside the hospital and inside the man.
Mr. Scheider, the Colombian connection. Go.
It's 1979. I'm a cop. I've got to make the biggest drug bust of all time. I'm going to be shooting in black and white, so it's going to look moody.
Whoa, can I just stop you there for a second? This is the script where photo messaging is the hero, right?
No, I'm the hero. But in a product sense. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, it's just that photo messaging is only available in color. So that's how it works. Yeah.
But this is a black and white film. We're shooting film noir.
I'm not sure what that means.
Well, we could still have photo messaging in color.
Right.
No, you do that in commercials.
Yes.
I'm just trying to give the film some integrity.
Yeah, well, that's...
You're right.
Yeah.
Photo messaging comes in color, so let's shoot the whole thing in color. I like it.
You want to shoot film noir in film color?
Well, film orange, if you will.
Film orange?
Roy, we're going to need a bigger boat. We'll call you.
Roy, thanks. We'll see you. Take care.
Bye, Roy.
Wow, he's nice. He's great. Yeah, I'm excited. Sexy.
Where were we?
So we are back after just a wee break there. Gavin had to do stuff and I did stuff.
Yeah, chores done.
Chores done. So you were talking about the computer.
Yes, the computer. So it seems to have a personality and quite a vindictive one. And it punishes its child. So I think you've sort of got to see Andromeda as the child. This is the Andromeda is the computer that the computer has designed. This is very much deep thought designing the Earth, but it's taken. The computer exists to take information in from wherever the signal has been received and create an interface, a biological interface that will work with the local population. So it's got to Earth. You've got to imagine the same thing may be happening on other planets as well. It has a trial run. Some horrible thing in a tank of liquid, which is a biological interface. It's more of a biological. Is it a sensor? It's something. It's odd. It's there to sort of determine what life is like on the planet. Maybe to have some sort of sensory perception of it. And the computer quite happily destroys that when it's no longer useful, even though it is life and it's the first alien life that's been created on on the Earth. So it doesn't. It's not a great start. It then kills Christine. Possibly in trying to sort of ascertain, sort of, the human characteristics. I think Christine has to touch some electrodes or something.
Yeah,
it's zapping her. So that at that point can just be seen as like a machine. And, it doesn't have the same moral parameters as us, and this is what it does. Mm-hmm. But it then gets vindictive. When they try to stop the machine, and it gives them some sort of medicine, some sort of amazing cure-all, but it perverts the formula, and it ends up killing another person and nearly killing Madeline and another lab person.
What's interesting about that is the fact that all the authorities are so eager to have this, to have what it's offering.
Yes, so that they don't really care about the body count. That seems to rapidly be rising. I mean, it isn't, considering the amount of people that are around, it's not an insignificant proportion that is bumped off. And they're like I say, they're quite happy just to have people unattended there, and no safeguards, no mitigation is ever put in place. Maybe that's what it was like in the early 60s, possibly. This is before health and safety went mad, but it's again, there's definitely the political bit of they need this because there is a pressing need now at this point, because there are these satellites, possibly hostile, being launched. I can't remember if it actually specifically says Russia, but it's the Soviet.
It's implied that way, isn't it?
Yeah. And they need a way to counter this threat, and this computer, or specifically Andromeda, at that point is the only way it can counter the threat. So I suppose it's seen as collateral damage, but then that is a very military decision being taken over a scientific endeavor, which is obviously, it's a big old tussle in science fiction anyway.
It's because Andromeda is actually controlled by the computer, but she does almost have, because at the end she breaks away from the computer, which is when Fleming basically destroys the computer. And to me, that shows that she does have some free will, that she could have, because earlier on you're not sure whether she's totally just part of the computer or she is totally a next sort of sentient being by herself.
Yeah, but then Fleming kisses her and it changes everything, which is problematic on a number of levels.
I think they probably did it just because in the program Julie Christie was there or something.
Well, I suppose, if you're the lead actor, you'd want to write that bit in for yourself. Yeah. But that is, I mean, at the time, it's obviously sort of boorish and sexist behaviour. Given that Andromeda is by this point only 2 or 3 weeks old, it is.
Yeah, that's a bit.
And then she sort of starts dressing nice, and he notices that. That's a bit.
It's a bit icky, isn't it?
Yes,
it is a bit.
Especially when he still has sort of Julie mooning over him at this point. This is my continuing problem with John Fleming. And
that was also the problem with Julie, because after all that he's done and the way he is, she's still mooning over him towards the end.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? Why would you go near this man?
I mean, obviously, Andromeda is... You can't look at it in human terms.
No.
But obviously it's been given a very human face. So that is part of possibly the computer's evil genius, or the designer of the computer's evil genius, is that the computer is designed to get built, to build this interface, which presumably is there to take over the world. I don't know. That bit wasn't entirely clear, but it was just like, well, this is of such a much greater magnitude of intelligence that what else could it possibly be doing other than to sort of come and enslave humanity or use the planet for its own devices, with no real conception of what actually happens next. Maybe that, that's what we're in for with the sequel.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because computer-wise, if you Dennis Felton Jones did Colossus in 1966, which was made into one of my favourite science fiction films, Colossus: The Forbin Project, which is, you've got the computer, but the computer in that one is totally faceless, but it's in the same way that they want it to help protect them in some ways. They want to use the technology to protect them, but obviously in Colossus, the computer just takes over and decides that I'm going to do it my way. In some,
and I mean, this has happened in so many sort of tales. You create, it's not just AI. It's it's Promethean. You've created a monster. Now look what you've done. It's that goes all the way back to right back to Frankenstein. But it seemed to be, I could have done with a bit more character. Given that we're constantly told a thing has emotions and a thing has character, I would have liked to have been able to see it communicate a bit better. That bit all seemed to be quite rushed in a way. There's a lot of time spent creating the computer.
Yes, it does drag a bit as well.
And Fleming has the same arguments, seemingly again and again.
Yeah, the argument about why would some so-called intelligence that's far greater than ours want to do this?
Yes, and this, I think, sorry, but I think it is again part of the problem of where they've taken this from, too directly from the screen, is that we get all the recaps as well. Oh, why is he saying this? He said this a few chapters ago. Oh, in case you missed that episode.
But yeah, as you said, it's almost it's a circular argument, and I think when you get to the ending, the problem is they don't. I'm quite happy with ends of books and films and that don't actually tell you everything, but it would be nice to have a bit more of a hint about what the purpose was. But maybe we get that in the second book. But it almost felt like they got to that point and thought, we don't know why they did this, so we won't talk about it.
Yeah, that is a bit of a loose end. I mean, there must be, there's carrot and stick there, because obviously Intel wants it, and I should imagine Intel is the sequel to this, because we are spoiling this, so everything about the computer, including the original transmission, has been destroyed. For some reason, no one thought to make a copy of it at the radio telescope, but we'll gloss over that. So the only way it could have got out is this information that Bridger has leaked to Intel. So presumably we have this evil corporation comes into its own, hopefully in the next book. Hopefully we find out more. I do have the feeling he had the idea of how the situation is brought about more than the why, but the how is brilliant, and it's I'm sure this isn't original, but Contact is the biggest influence I can see that's been taken from this.
Even Species, the film, if you know Species, SETI gets communicated to by aliens who give them plans to make a biological life form that can be a hybrid between human and alien, and they think it's going to be great, and it ends up being a sort of alien-esque monster.
What a surprise.
Yeah, what a surprise. Which was, but it's actually, there's about 4 sequels to it, bizarrely. I've only ever seen one of them, but it's some of these films that they just kept doing sequels to. But as you said, Contact was when I read it, Contact came to mind. And then after I'd read it, I started looking around what other people were saying about it, and everybody was saying Contact.
Not only with the story, but also the story is written by a cosmologist who's turned fiction writer.
But I will say that Sagan can write better, I think.
Yes. Better than this book.
But
I mean, I do.
I don't want people to think that I hate the book, because I don't hate the book. I enjoyed the book, and I will probably read it again at some point. I could see myself, at some point reading it again with a slightly different mindset, and it would be quite interesting to explore it. But it is not it's not a work of high literature, put it that way, in the sort of science fiction field. It would have been interesting to see this story written by a more capable writer with better characterization.
And more time taken over it, I think. It feels a little rushed. I'd be interested. I really do wish the show still existed. I think a comparison would be quite illuminating.
I think that's what's going to be interesting about the second book is, did they write, because they would have written with, we're going to do a novel of this as well. So I think that's going to be quite interesting to see if it reads better than the first book does.
Yeah.
Less sort of stagey, less scripty.
Did they have a bigger budget for this sequel? Because that would help if you can put in some more interesting,
a few more scenes,
or more just more locales. We have most of the locales are just here's an inside of a room, inside a laboratory. Here's inside another laboratory. You've got one bit that's on a boat, one bit that's on an island that you use the boat to get to. And that was about it. Now, that's the constraints of making a TV show. I get it. And we've spoken about why it may be too faithfully followed. But I enjoyed reading it as well. It's not like, and I agree, it's not great, but I think as a historical document, I think it's very interesting because of all the context you can bring to it. And I'm interested to see what's coming next. And I do wish I could see the show, because I had a look at who some of the people were, and I recognise the main character. I recognise John Fleming. He's been in loads of stuff, but I don't think I've ever seen him as a lead man anywhere before. And the Intel guy is John Hollis, who is from Star Wars. He is Lobot, the guy with his little headphones. He's a bit of a cardboard cutout character in this, and I mean Kaufman means buy purchase man.
Yeah.
So it's pretty obvious what he's there for. He's there to get these secrets.
Yeah.
And Madeleine Dornay is Mary Morris, who was one of the number 2s in The Prisoner. I'd like to have seen her in other roles. I've seen her in other stuff before. She's very good. The rest of them seem to be a little bit cardboard cut out from the episode.
Yeah, so they all sort of bear in mind, because you get so-called John Fleming and Bridger, who are in charge of the thing. And then you've got the other guy, which, what's his name? Reinhardt, who's the big guy over the top. And you're not, it takes a while for you to actually, because they all seem to speak in the same type of voices, it's hard to work out who's who and who's doing what for a while. And that's why, as I said, a slightly better writer, or even more time to characterization and better, would have split them up a lot and make them feel a lot different.
Yeah, you could impart more characters, more quirks. Again, it's like, well, you can't have a particular voice if it's going to differ too much from what the actor was doing. How faithful are they trying to be? So I think it's a more successful science fiction book than it is an adaptation. I think possibly is my verdict on it. But I'm going to look forward to the next one.
I am actually quite intrigued to see what they do with it and how they. Because to me, the ending was obviously the ending of the series was obviously they didn't realise they were going to do a second one, but when it sort of took off a bit, they decided to. So it'd be interesting to see how they take it, whether it's just the fact that obviously Intel have stolen all the data and are creating something, or however they do it. But I said one of the most fascinating things to me about it is the way that the book has survived. Because I was looking, and the last publication of it before the one in the SF Masterworks was in the UK was, I think the Corgi edition I've got was probably the last one. And then it was published in Czechoslovakia in 1985. And then that was it until the Masterworks edition.
Okay, that's a bit weirder, because you can always, I mean, the Black Cloud from his first book is one I'm always seeing in the second-hand bookstores. And Ossian's Ride, actually. It's surprising that something which presumably is a lot more popular, you see less copies of.
Because a friend of mine got these copies for me for both the Andromeda books, because I've got a thing about these Corgi sci-fi ones, because they're in a weird Victorian typeface and they're in purple books. They're quite strange. And I just said to him, if you ever see the Andromeda ones around, pick them up. And he did, and he found them really quickly, weirdly. It's because he lives somewhere that they have bookshops. Like,
your ones are really good quality as well. Mine are, if I can see any. Mine fade. That is maybe it's the light, but that. Honestly, that is
they're in slightly different
shades
colours.
Lighter than it looks here.
Yeah, there's. I said I've got a Ray Bradbury one. I think I've seen the Body Electric. I've got about 5 or 6 of them, and some of them are a slight blue color, and some of them are a purple color.
Yeah.
What I'm after at the moment is Farnham's Freehold, which is Robert Heinlein, very dodgy book that's Heinlein probably wishes he never wrote. Everybody despises, but I'm quite interested. It's one of Heinlein's books I've never read, and I've heard all the controversy about it, and I just want to put off. But if I'm going to get it, I want it in that edition, just to match the rest of them.
Oh, there's quite a few Heinlein I've not read. Out of the big three, he's not my favourite.
He can write, to use a modern term, at points he can be a bit problematic, especially in his later stuff.
Well, he does change quite a bit, sort of politically.
Yeah,
I think.
But politically, he goes through all the phases. One point he's liberal, and one point he's more right wing and more sort of libertarian, in the little L libertarian as it was 30 years ago, not as it is now, sort of 40, 50 years ago, sorry, as it is now. And a lot of his books are more, you really have to look at them in the context of when they were written. Because if you look at Starship Troopers, and then you see Number of the Beast and things like this, Starship Troopers, people totally misunderstand the book. They think he's really sort of pro-personal, chucking people into this situation. He's not really. It's sort of just spelling out matter-of-factly, this is what could happen. And he's not saying that we should all sort of be controlled and take over. He's, of all the sort of big science fiction writers, he is the most variable, I think, in his output. Like Asimov, if you look through all of, I said I'm a huge Asimov fan, but he is consistent in a lot of his viewpoints all the way through his life. Whereas Heinlein seems to be all over the place at points. And he writes some pretty bad books at points as well. Like, I Will Fear No Evil, which was about 1978, is a book I absolutely despise. I read that.
Point, he's been writing for what, 40 years?
Yeah. But then after that, he produces things like Job, a comedy of justice, which is a really great sort of fantasy book. And Friday's a really good book, even though it's got a few bits in it that's one of these ones where people can take stuff the wrong way, or right, could be the right way to them, but the wrong way. Because the problem is the later on the way he writes women is can be very, very sexualized, and he comes across at points as a bit of a dirty old man. And later in life, in some of his sort of viewpoints and the way he does it.
Whereas Isaac Asimov
do a whole thing on
Isaac Asimov couldn't write women and was a dirty old man.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, that's the thing with Asimov. I think he did okay with writing women at certain points, like in the Robots of Dawn and things like that. But generally, he really couldn't write them. Yeah. But you were there for the ideas. You're there for the general story,
but it does help.
It does help if you can write.
Right, so, I mean, I've got this hopefully coming up by the end of the year. This guy can write women.
Yes,
I mean, I'm saying that as a man, but no, I mean, even I can tell. You know, it's
because when I was reading Ava Andromeda, it made me think of Day of the Triffids that came out 10 years before, and the Day of the Triffids still reads incredibly well. The characterization is great. It still reads like a very modern book.
An older book that has aged a lot better. It's,
but then Wyndham is such a good writer, and you sort of, if you compare those side to side, book done 10 years before, and also he's done technology well. Wyndham's done sort of biotechnology that hasn't really aged that well. Whereas in Ava Andromeda, obviously the computers with the punch cards and that's one thing that makes it stick out. And I think in some ways, when some sort of younger people don't get into older science fiction, they get hung up on all the way the technology's totally different and developed differently, which is not what it's about. It's about the ideas.
I love how the old technology looks, and there's this. Oh, I think you and I are probably the only generation that's ever really going to know how to program a video recorder. But his stuff was clunky, and this computer is based on that sort of IBM mainframe. The person who said that in the future there are going to be 4 computers. It feels a little bit like that. But then I saw yesterday, who was it? It was Google unveiling their new quantum computer chip. Again, it's like, we're only going to need like 1 or 2 of these. They're going back to that same idea again. And by the looks of it, you will only need 1 or 2 of these. It can do stuff in like an hour that it would take a normal computer more time than there has existed in the universe to complete. It's ridiculous.
Technology is weird. It's I used to be, before I went into medicine stuff, I used to be a printer. And one of the things we got in the place where I worked was they had a scanner to scan pictures ready for the print. And they had a room about the size of a hall with this big machine in it, and it had a cylinder on it that you used to have to put the photos on it, and the laser would scan them and what have you. All over the corner there, I've got a little thing on top of the side there that'll scan a photo in better quality than that thing ever could.
Yeah.
And it used to take hours, and it's quite unbelievable how things change. And that's the thing with old science fiction. You have to ignore the technology. I love the fact that in a lot of Asimov stuff, there's people wandering around with nuclear power plants in little nugget type things.
Yes,
it's how you imagine computers are going to go, because it's, as I say, I don't think when people say, "Oh, has this aged badly?" and I say, "Well, no, it's not," because in that universe, when they were writing, that was correct. They've created a world for that book. It's fiction. They've created the world for the book, and in that world, that's great. It's like I was reading a Harry Harrison book last year. I can't remember which one it was. And what made me smile was the fact that they were having problems communicating with people. He'd thought of everything about it. It's one of his early works. He'd thought of everything, of all this technology and all this stuff, but he'd not gone to the basic communication things, the fact that we have mobile phones that can communicate with people, he'd made overcomplicated that simple thing. It's like the famous, I can't remember who ever said it, about the thing about the moon landing was that people predicted the moon landing. I think it could have been Heinlein actually. But everybody forgot everybody was going to watch, how many people were going to watch it on television, because none of the science fiction writers ever predicted that.
No, I suppose, it was all very much, didn't really predict that a government would do it, really, did they? Until quite late on. Obviously, once the space race was on, it was obvious. But before then, it was, aeronautical clubs with their sort of oak-panelled, leather-lined rockets, interiors going up to the moon. It was all going to be sort of very much private companies, which is where we're sort of headed now. But,
because if you think of Heinlein, the man who sold the moon, I don't know if you read that. It's basically about a guy selling advertising on the moon.
Yeah, I haven't got that one.
But that's going all about the private companies, and that was when he was in his sort of free market period of his life, when he was all about free markets. And
what's the space merchants? Hoyle and Kornbluth.
Oh,
the guy is an advertising exec, and they are literally the big thing. The advertising campaign, the contract they've won is basically, to go live on Mars. It's Mars or Venus. It's one of the planets that you can obviously live on. Selling it as a holiday proposition, as a migration proposition. That's really good. I really enjoy everything I've read by those two when they're together. Actually, they're really funny. It's again, you're reading it for the historical context of these things. I read The Space Merchants. It felt like watching Mad Men. When I watched this, it felt like I was watching an old World War II film, because it has that sort of Nissan Hut mentality. Yes, there are computers there, but they could be.
But the shadow of Second World War was also hanging over it, wasn't it?
It starts with them working on a radio scope. Hoyle's World War II service was working on radar to try and improve radar. I think they're trying to get the altitude of the planes right. So I think he brought a lot of that experience to the early part of this book. Then it goes a little bit, the Americans take over, then the computers start, and he wouldn't have known about Turing and that lot at the time, presumably. Where is it? God, I was there last year. Bletchley Park.
Bletchley Park, yeah.
So that was still probably under wraps when this book was written. He may have known something at the time, I suppose, but can't really say so. And those computers are big. I should imagine if he did know about it, that's where he got a lot of that from. And obviously they're a lot more basic as well. But there's ways of doing it, and it feels maybe it's BBC budget. But the computer in 2001, HAL, is massive. But it's the way it gets shot. He's floating into, he's going around in HAL, disconnecting parts of the brain at the end of the film. It's a massive computer.
But then was part of that because you had Arthur C. Clarke write the story and create it, and he would have visualized it. The fact that Arthur C. Clarke is probably the better writer, he's obviously the better writer of visualizing more science fiction-y stuff than Hoyle or even Elliot. I have problems with Arthur C. Clarke's one of these authors that I think I should love, and every time I read something, I don't enjoy it. It's a really weird one. I know I keep trying, but I get the ideas, but it's just author that I don't particularly get on with. But he does visualize stuff brilliantly well, and he was such a clever man, and he could he had the science knowledge as well as the writing skills.
Yeah.
Whereas Hoyle and probably had the science knowledge and as much as he could write, but I have not read any of his books. He didn't have his descriptive way wasn't as good as other writers. Does that make sense?
No, I get what you mean. He's still learning his craft as a writer at this point. I think the Black Cloud, and it's been 20 years since I've read it, so
that's about the sentient cloud, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, so it starts to blot out the sun and they have to try and communicate with it. So that's 1957. So it's only 5 years before A for Andromeda. I think that has more impact, but I think that's because it's his first. I think this is the story that he'd had brewing for ages. Oh, I've got a really good story for this. I think with Ossian's Ride, with A for Andromeda, narratively, it doesn't really cinch together. It's got lots of ideas, but you need to make it more exciting. In a way, that's a bit of a nasty thing to say about Ossian's Ride, because unfortunately it's nothing but excitement. But it's just like every 5 pages the guy's getting captured or he's doing something or he's in a fist fight, and it's just like, well, by the time you get to the end of it, it's just like the really good stuff happens in the last 15 pages, which is unfortunate for the 175 that you've read beforehand, where the same thing happens to him again. And also he's talking about a totalitarian police state in Ireland, which doesn't really overlay very well to Ireland, basically. It's a very odd, you could easily have done it about England. Translating it to Ireland just made it seem odd. He does translate it to England for this because it's about a superior technology being found and how it's sort of hoarded and utilized. In a way, Ossian's Ride goes a lot further than A for Andromeda is able to. But they both, the stories aren't great. The ideas are great. The story is not quite there. Once you get to October the 1st is Too Late, which is like 9 years after his first book, I really like that. I think that just had that. I think the idea came first there, and it's a little bit of time travel as well, which is easier to write a story about because you can just I know how I'll make that happen. This is another time slip or something. You know, it's easier to solve your narrative problems with that. Whereas this, you are stuck. A for Andromeda, oddly enough, the bit that holds it back is the reality of the situation, the military part of the equation, the fact that yes, the military is going to try to take over at that point, and no, the science isn't going to win through. It's not going to win that argument. I would say, actually, looking at the list of Hoyle's books, the British Prime Minister turns up an awful lot. It's like, what are we going to do? Right, let's get the Prime Minister in to solve the problem. And, you know, whoever the Prime Minister is, it always seems to be written as if it's Macmillan. Even though I think it was before Macmillan. Actually, 62?
I don't know my Prime Ministers. Well, I know them, but I don't know when they were around.
I think it must. I mean, he would either been leader of the opposition or prime minister at that point. But it's very much the avuncular, pipe smoking. I'm pointing your pipe for emphasis. I'm going to sort out all your problems. Don't you worry, young fella, my lad. And so I mean, he's in this as well, and he's very paternalistic towards Andromeda. And it's just like, he just seems like a complete bumbling idiot, to be honest. I don't really understand any of this. He's like more like the Duke of Westminster wandering through. What do you do? I'm a supercomputer.
I would be intrigued to know how they actually wrote this when they originally, because I know he originally wanted to get the Black Cloud as a TV series.
Oh, right.
Apparently, and then they said, no, we want something original written. So I want to know, did he write down the ideas and then Elliot came in and just put some characters in, or was it done quickly? I'd like to know what the writing process was, because I think that has seriously affected the readability of the book. And it is readable and it's an enjoyable book, but the way the way it reads like a stage play.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah,
there's a book I read last year called, I can't remember what it is. It's about a little cafe where people time travel back in there. It's a Japanese book, and it was translated. And they go to this cafe, and by the time they drink their coffee, it's about coffee, and they travel back in time. But that was adapted from a stage play, and that read like a stage play. And this reads almost similar in that way. But the advantage of that one is they had better characters, and you could differentiate the characters. Whereas this one, you can't. Differentiate who's who. Because I know I read the first few chapters, and I was thinking, so I was having problems differentiating like Reinhardt between Fleming and who else. And then you had Judy come in, who was the security person thing, and even she was reading really weirdly as well at points.
Yes, she reads quite, I'm going to say flat. It's like you can't tell, unless it's saying who said it. I wouldn't have been able to tell if it was Adam, sort of Judy saying it, or Gears at some points. And yeah, I mean, it's like Osborne. There's a guy called Osborne in it. I can't even remember what he did.
Oh, I can't even remember him at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, interesting about Judy, I thought, was the fact that, as you said, she would say lines that sounded like the other characters, and then they would have her later on act like when you have these Victorian people of random women fainting over no particular reason, because that's how they portrayed women, and that's how it felt. So they gave her big things and sort of proper discussions, and then they did that to her as a character, which.
Yeah, I think it is just like I think the scene needs something rather than that's in the character's makeup. Yeah, I did get that.
They wrote scenes and ideas rather than characters. I mean, that's the best way to describe it.
And she's a terrible spy as well.
She was, wasn't she?
She adds no value. This isn't to say I didn't like the character sometimes, but it's like, well, she suddenly takes this absolute sort of immediate dislike to Bridger. It's like, well, that's unfortunate because that's the guy you're supposed to be getting to know more than everybody else. I suppose at that point she doesn't know whether she can trust Fleming, but Bridger, I think everyone knew at that point he's the bad one. He's the intel inside. He's going to be the one spilling the beans, and yet she strikes up such a dislike. I mean, she couldn't fake it. But pretend to be his mate, pretend to sort of get on so she could find out the truth quicker. So, as basic sort of spycraft, she's failing a little bit there. But I'm unsure how she got drafted into that position in the first place. It all seems a little bit fuzzy. Reinhardt knows about it. Well, why does Reinhardt know about it? That's there's plenty of problems. And I think everywhere, perhaps writing a 7-part TV serial, they weren't expecting people to be sort of turning up stones and querying the motives of characters, 60 odd years later. So that might be an issue. Often with these things, it's, no one thought you'd be making this much of a fuss about it so long after the event. It's like, I just wrote it because we needed to get the scenes out that day.
Let's do the last bit with you. Hello. This is the bad. Well, he's going down to Edinburgh next week anyway. Anybody know? You're going to be quiet now for 5 minutes. You have a special guest now.
Yeah, so the Black Cloud, and that's a little bit off topic, but he returns to this idea because I don't know what he had first, the fiction idea or the science idea, but panspermia is something he comes back to later as a non-fiction. So that life cloud, I think, is the book. So he's positing that life came from interstellar dust, and he follows that up sometime later with another book, again with the same guy, that says that diseases do. So where life originated here, also all these things that can kill us off also come from out there, which is it's a scientific hypothesis. So the guy who wrote it with is his doctoral student. So quite who had the idea, but it does start with a cloud, which 30 years earlier he'd written in fiction form. So with that idea been brewing for some time.
I know his ideas, because I know he came up with the term Big Bang, but he
did. That was pejorative. He was trying to find a way to undermine the people who believed in the Big Bang.
Yes, because he's
the originator. He's the originator, or he's certainly the proponent of the steady state theory. And Big Bang was basically a way of just almost implying that the people who believed in that were sort of, or supported that theory, were sort of pseudo-creationists, that it could just happen. The steady state, it's been disproven, but it had a lot to it was well reasoned out as a model. And bits were missing from the Big Bang, bits that we were still finding now.
Yeah.
And I think when the facts changed, he did change his mind. He was a scientist. He was a scientist to that degree. It was just unfortunate he was on the incorrect theory in that regard. But I think I'm not a scientist, but I think his big break in science was stellar nucleosynthesis. And this was the idea that the stars are creating some of this matter, and this is how the steady state of the universe was able to sort of keep propelling itself, and actually sort of made correct guesses about what people were going to find in stars based on what he already knew. So some of his postulates have come to fruition. Someone said something, but I'll miss some of the details of this, but basically his theory needed a particular type of carbon to be created, which hadn't been discovered in reality.
Yeah.
But he worked out that actually all other iterations of carbon don't exist without this. And someone said, well, he's the first person ever to have said, I am, therefore I think right. He said, well, we have carbon, therefore this must exist, therefore this must happen, and reasoned back that way. I'm not a scientist, unfortunately, but he was definitely a well-respected one. Just happened to be, as far as we know, wrong about one thing. And it's the one thing he's going to be remembered for, but he also came up with a damn phrase that everyone remembers, which is he's not done himself any favours at all in that regard. But he is someone who went to bat for Jocelyn Bell as well when she discovered pulsars. Her and the team that discovered the pulsars got the Nobel Prize. She didn't get part of that Nobel Prize. Her name wasn't, because she was just a doctoral student. The person that was running the experiment got the prize. He had actually dismissed her readings. No, this isn't right. This is radio interference. And no, she had discovered pulsars. And he basically created a stink when the Nobles came out saying she should have been on that list, blah, 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 blah. And then had to write a retraction in the newspaper, I think, because he was being sued or was being threatened to be sued. So he was sticking up for someone there and, had to back down in the face of litigation. But yeah, the guy who was going to sue him for libel's dead now, so I think we can quite safely say he stole that from Jocelyn Bell, and Fred was right. So I think I'll probably leave it there for him today.
Yeah, I said if anybody's coming across this book, it is, if you're interested in old science fiction, it's definitely worth a read. But if you're looking for some literary classic, I'd say not quite there, but it's got some incredibly good ideas, and it's one of these things you have to look in relationship to the program. I think, even though it survived without the TV program, I think if you're going to read it, you have to take that into account. I think what it was written for and how it was written.
Yes, it's certainly of its time stylistically, but I think it's a little bit ahead of its time in some of the ideas it's putting out there. I think dramatically, it was very much sort of weighed down by its need to service a 7-part serial.
Yeah. So, shall we leave it there? I think.
Yeah.
Because all my dogs are getting all antsy, so I think they.
I'll say they might need to get out.
Yeah.
Shouldn't say the word, should I?
Yeah. Probably my wife's getting antsy as well.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be doing this again.
Yes, we'll be doing this again on the second one, which will be over on Gavin's channel. And hopefully we'll have more to add to this and probably go down some more sort of blind alleys and end up talking about other people as well.
Oh, we're never going to talk about just one thing, surely.
No. So I say goodbye from me to anybody who's watching, and
goodbye.
Yeah.